Hey everybody, this is Mr. Pugh, and today we're going to be talking about Japan after World War II. We just finished talking about the Soviet Union and its collapse, right? The Cold War collapsed with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Soviet Union ended up disbanding, and so Russia became its own country, and a bunch of those satellite countries became their own countries, which is still causing conflicts today. But the end of the Civil War or Cold War happened. So now we're on to Japan, one of the other bad guys in World War II, right? They were part of the Axis powers along with Italy and Germany. And so Hitler, Mussolini, and the militarists from Japan were all in one group. And eventually they bombed Pearl Harbor, which dragged the United States into the war, which was a huge mistake, right? And we were infuriated about that. So at the end of World War II, we turned our attention to Japan strictly after Germany decided to surrender. And we bombed Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and killed 70,000 people just like that. And a couple days later, on August 9th, we bombed Nagasaki, which vaporized 40,000 people just like that. And then a lot more died of radiation later on. They surrendered shortly thereafter in 1945, and that was the end of World War II. But Japan was destroyed, and they had to rebuild. We know that right now they're kind of a superpower in the world, right? But then they were in shambles. Half the homes in Tokyo had been destroyed. So war had definitely taken an effect from bombs and things like that. There was a lot of tens of thousands, actually, of homeless and hungry people. They had a famine about the same time when their crops failed. So it was kind of a double whammy for them. They had the war ending and they didn't have any food. So it was a really tough time in Japan, but America helped them rebuild, right? They went from enemy to ally very quickly. We helped them rebuild, and one of the reasons was we wanted them to be a democracy, right? We didn't want them to go communist like the Soviet Union was at that time and China was. So we wanted them to stay with us and be on our side as opposed to the other side. So we forced them to become a democracy. We didn't have trials for the war crimes that were committed against our people and against the Chinese people because there were definite atrocities committed by the Japanese military. So we wanted that to end. So there were some major changes in Japan since World War II. Number one, we ended that militarist regime. We got rid of the military guys. We said, you guys are no longer in charge. They had an emperor, but he was kind of just a figurehead, right? He was just a guy that was there, not making the major decisions. We made them a constitutional monarchy. And that means that there's a king or queen, but it's limited by a constitution. And so everything is limited by a constitution, just like we have in our country, right? We have a constitutional government in the United States. Whatever we do is limited by our constitution. We can't go against that thing. They had freedom of thought and assembly and speech and legal equality for people in Japan. They ended up with what was called a diet or a parliament. That's like our Senate, if you will. And that's elected by the people. So they did become a democracy in Japan, and that helped speed up the process. That and a lot of money from the United States, right? We also disbanded their military altogether. Their military could only be for defense. And so we kept American military bases in Japan, and they were under our nuclear umbrella. We said if anybody messes with Japan, we got their back. So although they can't have a military, you've got the United States military, which is even better, right? So they didn't have to spend any money on military. They just had the United States spend it for them. They became a global power, right? They ended up with a lot of money and as a major player in the world. They had modern factories. A lot of their factories were destroyed, and so they poured money into their factories, and they became, I guess, way more modern than our factories that were built in the 1920s, right? So they had modern factories, and they turned out great products. They had an educated workforce that turned out great products, and they were able to export a lot of these products because they were high quality, way different than Russia, who had crappy products that nobody wanted, and so they wouldn't buy them. Japan had great products, so everybody wanted to buy them, including people in the United States. Educated workers had a lot to do with that. Their kids go to school about 240 days a year. And that includes half days on Saturdays. Maybe a little bit too much. Now think about it. We go between 180 and 190 days. They add a lot to that. I'm no math guy, but 240 minus 20, 60 extra days. That's a lot in a year, right? And since they didn't have that military spending, they could afford to put that money into factories and these great products and these educated workers and other things, right? So they save their money on the military and put it elsewhere. Imagine if the United States did that. If we didn't spend trillions of dollars on our military, where that money could be spent. So that was a big difference. There's also a lot of social changes in Japan during this time, right? There was worker protection. Right? Labor unions came in, and workers had the right to organize and fight for better wages, which increased, the money that they could spend on other products, and that boosted their economy. They do have crowded cities in Japan, right? We know this that Japan is kind of this island nation. It's not very big, but it's very crowded. It has 127 million people about right now. But that population, surprisingly, is going down. It's declining. And they say that that could be a real issue. Their birth rates are really low. That means not a lot of babies are being born. And people are living longer, but nobody's really being born. So it's going to diminish their population, which causes a big problem when those workers are supposed to support those old people who cannot work. That is an issue. A declining population is a bad problem for places to have. Although these cities are crowded, there is a very low crime rate, a serious crime rate in Japan. So although there's overcrowding in some areas, not a lot of crime. So those are the social changes within Japan, amongst other things. All right, that's it for Japan for today, and I will talk to you again tomorrow. Answer the questions, and good luck.